Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg, founder and editor-in-chief of All Israel News, and I'm glad to be joined on this Zoom interview today by Melody Sukarevich. She was the senior foreign policy advisor to now Defense Minister Benny Gantz. She worked with him as an advisor for a number of years in a number of roles that he was in the opposition. Now, of course, he's serving in the government. She's not working in the government. She's working on the outside as a political and strategic consultant, foreign policy analyst. And she's an expert, particularly on Europe, which is why I've asked her to talk to us today. But I also want to welcome you, Melody, not only to the Zoom interview, but to being our newest All Israel News Advisory Board member.
Thank you, Joel. It is my great pleasure.
Well, we're grateful, and we're so glad to have Israelis who have served in a wide range of positions and from a wide range of political and philosophical perspectives, helping us to make sure this is a fair and balanced news service and providing very useful analysis. So let's go with your expertise and where we are right now with Europe. Israel in the Middle East is moving in very dramatic ways right now, in which you have more and more leaders in the Arab Muslim world who understand the threat of radical Islamism and are taking really quite dramatic and bold steps to counter radical Islamism, whether that's sort of the apocalyptic state version in Iran or the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and others. And we're also seeing, of course, this is drawing Israel and many of the Arab states together, some formally, others not quite yet. But we're seeing something very different so far, broadly speaking, in the European Union. And I wanted you to talk about, from your expertise, having been born and raised in Germany before coming here, give us your take on, with all the latest attacks, in fact, the beheading in a church and some other really horrible Islamist or radical Islamist attacks. Walk us through how Europe is dealing with this radical Islamist threat and how they're not dealing with it from your perspective.
Gladly. Joel, you started out actually speaking about the wonderful developments that we've seen in the Middle East that just several months ago, even the last time the two of us spoke and met in person pre-corona, were totally unthinkable. You know, it was the times where you would think about, for example, the trip that you had leading a Christian delegation to Saudi Arabia, something almost sounding like science fiction. So now we are here in this new wonderful reality, closer to this wonderful creature called the new Middle East than ever before, with pragmatist forces and progress-seeking leaders taking courageous decisions that just ease the lives of everybody and bring prosperity and hope to the people. So we have this on the one side, and then we have the reactions of the radical forces on the other side. And this topic, which of course oppose this, which cry out against this new wave of peace agreements and think that this is something that legitimizes them to call out for some violence. Some of them call out for violence, some of them just for protests against these new arrangements. I'm sure you heard about, for example, the fatwa by certain Palestinian imams against visitors from the Emirates coming here who want to pray in Jerusalem. So this is really, this is kind of this division that we see right now between the pragmatists and the radical forces. Now, how does that link to your question about how Europe deals with the Islamist threats that it faces, unfortunately, now more than ever before? I think there is quite a direct link. I think that for too long, Europe was kind of ignorant and politically naive about the threats and the actual intentions behind those radical Islamist forces. And if you look at, for example, Europe's policy vis-a-vis the one that you just mentioned, this apocalyptic Iranian regime, that for decades has been spreading its fundamentalist Shia ideology throughout the region, and that for a long time has been financing and mobilizing proxy terror organizations that don't just threaten Israel, and that have for a long time committed horrific human rights atrocities, not just against women, Baha'is, homosexuals, also persecuting Christians who for many years have to fear daily for arrests and interrogations and so on. So if you look at this track record of this Iranian regime and you see the European policy vis-a-vis this regime in general, and specifically in the context of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, then you understand how there has been a discrepancy evolving between Europe's intentions, for sure, to do good in the Middle East, to keep its own society safe and democratic, and the actual outcome.
And let me drill into that just for a moment, because I know what I was asking was a big topic, and we're going to have to break it into several small chunks. But specifically on the Iran threat and the Iran nuclear deal. Let's start with the presumption that I think that it's fair that most European countries agreed with President Obama and then Vice President, Obama and Biden, that this was not going to dodge the issue, but it was going to help resolve the issue. So I want to be careful that while we're in a world in the last 4 years where President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I would say the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and others very much agreed that the Iran deal was a disaster, the Europeans felt it was not a disaster, that this was some sort of on-ramp for Iran to sort of come back into the family of nations. So talk about why do they hold on to that view when I think you're even seeing a recalculation among some Biden advisors right now that maybe what Trump did wasn't the worst way to deal with Iran.
Look, I believe that because of Europe's history and Europe's mentality, you have a kind of political paradigm that holds onto appeasement regardless of the geopolitical and the cultural context. And this is exactly what you're seeing in this very stubborn quest to stick to the JCPOA a long time after it has become clear that it wasn't what it was supposed to be. Yes, it started out as a deal with deficiencies from the beginning. Everybody knew that. The Europeans knew that themselves, the fact that ballistic missiles and regional expansion and aggressions were not included. But then there was this hope, after 12 years of negotiations, that this signature and this kind of diplomatic achievement would bring the Iranian regime into a new course. Now, when you look at what happened since the signing of the agreement until May 2018, when President Trump decided to leave the JCPOA, you have the answer to that very question. Did the Iranian regime change? Did it become more moderate? No, it didn't. Everything went in the other direction. Ballistic missile testing was more than doubled. The regional aggressions were exploding. Hezbollah alone received between $700 and $800 million in funding a year from the Iranian regime, while the Iranian economy that was so desperately in need of infrastructure, of development, of reforms, didn't receive any of that, while the Iranian people were really struggling. So, so you have this discrepancy between the intention of the JCPOA and the actual outcomes and the behavior of the Iranian regime. And this is where actually Europe failed to recognize the facts on the ground the way they are and quit wishing to see them the way they want to see it.
Melody, are there some countries in Europe that have done better and some that have done worse? Are you able to separate out some, or has it been across the board, everybody's seeing it the same way?
Well, the ones that are decisive, of course, in the context of the JCPOA are the E3, the UK, France, and Germany. And among them, there were, taking tolls somehow. Like there were times where France has been more outspoken, where the UK has been more outspoken. And Germany, unfortunately, I believe, missed a couple of opportunities to show a clear stance vis-a-vis the Iranian regime, even after the development of President Trump quitting the JCPOA. What happened back then was no more and no less than nuclear bribery on behalf of the Ayatollah, saying either you fix this to the Europeans or we will continue, we will just breach the agreement and we will send millions of refugees all your way to Europe. So instead of back then showing strength on behalf of Europe and setting the borders and saying you will not bribe us, and this is not how you do business with us. Instead of that, they kept on appeasing their regime. A few months later, or even a few weeks later, the foreign minister Maas was on his way to Tehran and sat there and spent a couple of days there trying to fix this. And I think this sends the wrong message, not only to the regime, but also to radical forces in Germany that feel that they, and in all over Europe, but unfortunately, especially in Germany, feeling that this is a comfortable habitat for them to grow.
What about the change in government in London with Boris Johnson coming in? Did he change anything? Should we expect anything going forward differently from the British?
Currently, look, I mean, Boris Johnson just announced drastic increases in their defense budget, which may show some kind of change in the priorities of the foreign policies. But I don't think that within the E3, there will be very strong divergences. And, obviously with Brexit now in the headlines and really ruling most of the policy making, I don't think that there will be, that the UK will be in a position to take drastic steps apart from its other European partners. But it really, I think, there's a lot of hope, especially here in Israel, where decision makers and policymakers are sometimes just really left with shaking their heads about European policies and behavior vis-a-vis radical forces, be it Iran, be it Turkey, where only now slowly there is a tone change to be seen. Is really the question of what more needs to happen for there to be a paradigm shift. So the hope is there, yes, maybe now is the time, and Europe will kind of hop onto this very positive and progress-seeking development now led by the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, with Israel and the so far US administration, rather than sticking on to the old dogma of appeasement, which, by the way, is not just bad for the Middle East, it's totally against European strategic interests.
So, all right, we only have a few minutes. So on that note, how has Europe responded to the Abraham Accords thus far?
I would say a fair description is lukewarm, meaning, of course, nobody condemned it. And of course, the statements reflected kind of favoring the agreement. But it is far from the kind of enthusiasm that you would have expected about something that is so unthinkable on the one side, has been so unthinkable just a few months ago. And on the other side can bring so much prosperity, so much economical cooperation, so much more security and stability, and yes, hope to the region. So there is a lot of question mark about why Europe kind of missed the opportunity to join this enthusiasm, enforce it, and try to support also the US administration in bringing more Arab countries to join this new path towards a new Middle East, and instead rather stuck to the old paradigm of saying without a two-state solution, there is nothing that we can be too happy and too enthusiastic about.
So let's talk about very briefly French President Macron and how he has responded to these terrible attacks inside France. Are we seeing an awakening or just a tactical response?
There is absolutely no doubt that in President Macron's reaction to the recent attacks, you see a shift from the appeasement or the silencing this form of Islamist extremism so far to declaring a battle. This is what Macron did. He declared a battle against radical Islam, and he didn't just do that in a statement. He backed it with legislation and with the intended legislation. And I think that he was very clear about it. And he was joined also by Chancellor Kurz from Austria. And he did receive statements of solidarity also from Germany. But again, not the kind of, you would expect after what happened. And I want to mention that there's also been an Islamist attack on German soil just in that very period that was kind of a little bit omitted by international media, also in Germany, by a Syrian refugee, a Syrian Islamist who attacked 2 homosexuals and killed one of them. So you would expect like a very bombastically announced solidaric front among all of the European states to fight this monster, to fight the social political danger that is now facing Europe.
Especially since France had been ground zero for other really horrific attacks in Paris and elsewhere, actually. The last piece I have to ask you about, but we'll have to also talk about it more in a future interview, is the one person that really did condemn Macron was the man who seems to be trying to become the leader of all Sunni radical Islamists in the world, and that would be Turkish President Erdogan. Quick comment on Erdogan and his position.
Well, what started out as kind of the showcase for a moderate Muslim leader when he took power, Erdogan, in the mid-2000s, unfortunately now undoubtedly turned into a leader who is no more and no less than bonding with radical Islam. He is the one supporting and spreading the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, again, dangerous not only because of its destabilizing potential for the Middle East, but also for Europe. It is very dangerous because what you see right now is a process of slow and gradual infiltration by Muslim Brotherhood related and affiliated institutions and individuals in official government institutions, even because they do what, by the way, the Ayatollahs know to do very well, and their politicians. They put on a very friendly Western smile, and they speak about Nietzsche, and they show them, have them listen to classical music, and European leaders naively think, oh, they're one of us, they can be trusted. And the real answer, of course, we know very well. It is no, they cannot be trusted. They don't share your value systems, and they don't have your very strategic goals. In fact, they oppose them. So this is, unfortunately, especially for Germany, a very severe problem, as there are over 4 million Turkish Muslims in Germany, many of them integrated, wonderful, successful people, more and more, unfortunately, joining this radicalization bandwagon.
Well, Melody, thank you. Thank you for your expertise on the radical Islamist issues in Europe, European, Middle Eastern relations. This is a conversation that I think needs to go on. We need to do more coverage at All Israel News and All Arab News, because I think, and I will just wrap by saying, just in the last few weeks, the first time ever I had a European diplomat reach out to me and say, hey, can I just come and have lunch with you and talk about some of these issues? I'm being asked to meet with the leaders of the Arab Muslim world. This was the first time a European official had ever reached out to me. And I'm not drawing a conclusion. I'm just saying I know that I need to spend more time thinking about Europe and how to engage European leaders, because right now, after 9/11 and after all these things, we still have not seen the type of understanding of the threat that the Arab Muslim world certainly sees and that the Europeans do not. Melody Sukarovich, thank you so much. I appreciate your insights. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for being on the All Israel News Advisory Board. We're so glad to have you aboard.
Thank you, Joel, for inviting me to this show, to this program. And thank you so much for asking me to join the advisory board, which I do wholeheartedly and gladly.